The glass towers of Brighton Holdings gleamed under the morning sun, a monument to power, ambition, and money. Inside, marble floors reflected the polished shoes of executives who hurried to their offices, their eyes fixed on phones and profits. No one noticed the man with the mop and the quiet stride moving between them. David Cole, the CEO, did notice, but only because he hated seeing him. God, does he have to be here during office hours? David muttered as he stepped out of the elevator, adjusting his cufflinks. Can't they clean up before sunrise like normal people? His assistant, nervously clutching a tablet, said, "That's the new janitor, sir. Name's Samuel Carter. He's on a temporary contract." David gave a dismissive wave. Well, let's hope temporary means very temporary. I don't like distractions in my building. Samuel, mopping near the corner, looked up briefly. He was in his late 50s, tall and sturdy, with calm brown eyes and the steady patience of a man who'd seen far too much to be bothered by arrogance. He nodded politely as the CEO passed. "Good morning, sir." David didn't even look at him. "Just don't scratch the marble." The assistant gave Samuel an awkward smile before following his boss. Samuel watched them go, then returned to his work. He'd been called worse by better men. By noon, the building was buzzing with talk of an upcoming deal, a massive merger between Brighton Holdings and a global energy firm. It was supposed to be the crowning achievement of David Cole's career, a deal that would cement his reputation as one of the most powerful CEOs on Wall Street. In the boardroom, David barked orders, his tone sharp. "I want projections, profit margins, environmental impact reports. Everything tied up by Friday. No mistakes. This is the kind of deal that puts our name on the map." As he spoke, Samuel quietly entered the hall outside, pushing his cart. Through the glass walls, he could see the meeting in progress. He paused for a moment, glancing at the company's logo, a silver triangle with the slogan, "Integrity builds empires." The irony wasn't lost on him. He'd once believed in those kinds of words. A soft crash startled him. One of the cleaning bottles had slipped off the cart and rolled toward the conference room door. It stopped just as David and the board stepped out. David's expression darkened. "Unbelievable. You're mopping right here during a meeting?" Samuel straightened, calm as ever. "Sorry, sir. Didn't mean to interrupt." David's voice was cold. "Next time, try doing your job when the important people aren't working." One of the executives shifted uncomfortably. "David, come on!" But David raised a hand. No, let's be honest. If he wants to work in a place like this, he should know when he's in the way." The hallway went silent. Samuel met his gaze, not with anger, but with quiet dignity. "With all due respect, sir, I've worked in a lot of buildings. The ones that shine the brightest are usually cleaned when no one's looking." A few people in the corridor paused, glancing at one another. David's jaw tightened, but Samuel simply picked up the bottle, placed it back on the cart, and continued down the hall. The CEO muttered something under his breath, something sharp, something meant to sting, but Samuel didn't hear it. Or maybe he did, and just didn't care. Later that evening, when most of the staff had gone home, Samuel stayed behind to finish his rounds. The office lights dimmed automatically, leaving a golden glow over the vast open floor. As he emptied trash bins and wiped down desks, he noticed a faint buzzing sound coming from the server room, a flicker of light through the glass door. He frowned. That wasn't normal. Setting his mop aside, he stepped closer and peered inside. One of the servers was blinking red, a sign of overheating or overload. Years ago, before life had changed course, he'd worked maintenance in a manufacturing plant. He recognized the signs of electrical failure. "Not good," he murmured. He found a small toolkit on his cart, one he always carried, just in case. Gently, he opened the panel and checked the fans. They were clogged with dust. One wire nearly melted through. If that server went down, it could take the company's entire network with it. He unplugged the power, cleared the debris, and replaced the burned section with a spare wire he'd kept for emergencies. When the lights turned from red to green, he exhaled, a small smile touching his lips. He didn't expect thanks. He didn't expect anyone to even notice. He just did what needed to be done, like he always had. But what Samuel didn't know was that this small act of care, done in silence and humility, had just saved Brighton Holdings from a disaster that could have destroyed everything David Cole had built. And before the week was over, everyone, including David, would know it. The next morning, Brighton Holdings buzzed with its usual frenzy of emails, coffee, and stress. The boardroom was already full by 8 a.m., papers rustling as executives prepared for a call with investors. David Cole stood at the head of the table, his jaw tight, his tone sharp. "This merger is the biggest deal of our careers," he snapped. "One hiccup, one error in our systems, and we lose credibility. Do you understand?" The room murmured in agreement. David turned toward his assistant. "I want the network checked before the conference call. No tech issues, no interruptions. Tell IT to do a full diagnostic." The assistant nodded and left quickly. But within 10 minutes, she returned, her face pale. "Sir, we already have an issue." David's eyes narrowed. "What kind of issue?" "The main server crashed an hour ago. The data team can't access half the files. They're saying it could take days to rebuild if it's a full failure." The color drained from his face. "Days? Are you out of your mind? We have the merger presentation in 3 hours." He stormed toward the IT department, his team hurrying behind him. Inside the server room, the air smelled faintly of burnt plastic. The head technician was pacing, phone pressed to his ear. "We've isolated the problem, sir. It looks like an overheating fault, maybe dust buildup in the fan system. The strange thing is, the system rebooted itself overnight and stabilized before the main circuits fried. Someone shut it down manually before the damage spread." David frowned. "Who authorized that?" The tech shook his head. "No one on our team was here after midnight. We're still trying to find out who it was." He pointed to the logs on the monitor. "Whoever it was, they prevented a full meltdown. If they hadn't cut the power, every client file, every financial record, every communication log for the merger would have been gone." For a moment, David didn't move. His pride kept his mouth shut, but something inside him shifted. The faint echo of realization. Someone had saved his company, quietly, without permission or credit. "Find out who it was," he said finally. "Now!" By late afternoon, the company had avoided disaster. The investors' meeting went forward, the data restored, the presentation flawless. David's team celebrated in the executive lounge while he retreated to his office, a glass of scotch untouched on the desk. He couldn't stop thinking about that server, about the timing, the precision, the quiet act of competence. His assistant knocked lightly. "Sir, I found something." David looked up. "Well?" She held out a small report from building security. "The system shows someone badged into the server room last night at 11:46 p.m. It wasn't it. It was the janitorial access card." David's brow furrowed. "Janitorial?" "Yes, sir. Samuel Carter." For a few seconds, David just stared at the paper. Then, slowly, he set his drink aside and leaned back in his chair. "You're telling me the janitor saved our entire data system?" "Yes, sir. The maintenance logs show he disconnected the main server manually. If he hadn't, it would have overheated and destroyed everything." The words hung in the air, heavy as stone. He tried to picture Samuel, the quiet man with the mop, the one he'd embarrassed in front of half the board. He remembered that calm, patient voice saying, "The ones that shine the brightest are usually cleaned when no one's looking." Now, that line didn't sound simple anymore. It sounded prophetic. By the end of the day, Samuel had finished his rounds and was locking up his cleaning cart near the lobby. David stepped out of the elevator, his polished shoes clicking across the marble. For once, the entire floor seemed to notice the janitor and the CEO standing before him. "Mr. Carter," David said, his tone quieter than usual. Samuel looked up, surprised but calm. "Evening, sir." David hesitated. The words didn't come easily. "It tells me you were in the server room last night." "Yes, sir," Samuel replied. "One of the panels was flashing red. I've seen electrical failures before. Figured I'd better shut it down before it got worse." "You saved us," David said simply. "That system runs every part of this company. You probably prevented $100 million in damage." Samuel gave a small, modest shrug. "Just did what I thought was right." David stared at him, unsure how to respond. The silence stretched, heavy and uncomfortable, but not hostile. For once, he wasn't the man with all the power. He was just another human being facing someone he'd underestimated. Finally, he cleared his throat. "Come by my office tomorrow. There's something I'd like to discuss with you." Samuel nodded. "All right, sir. I'll be there." As David turned to leave, one of the junior executives whispered, "Is that the same janitor you—" David cut him off with a sharp glance. "Yes," he said. "And if any of you ever treat him with anything less than respect again, you'll answer to me." Samuel blinked, a small smile tugging at the corner of his mouth. He didn't say thank you. He didn't need to. The look in his eyes said enough. Quiet forgiveness, steady as ever. That night, when the office was dark again, David sat in his corner office, staring at the skyline. The city glittered beneath him like glass and gold. But for the first time, he saw it differently. He thought about the man mopping floors while he slept in luxury. The man who noticed what no one else did. Who took responsibility not because he was told to, but because it was right. And David couldn't shake the truth from his mind. The company hadn't been saved by power or money or brilliance. It had been saved by humility, by someone who cared. And that realization would change everything. The next morning, the atmosphere at Brighton Holdings was different. It wasn't the usual rush of ambition and pretense. Something quieter was in the air, a whisper that spread from desk to desk. Everyone had heard by now. The janitor saved the company. By 9 o'clock, most of the employees had gathered in the main lobby for an unscheduled meeting. Executives in tailored suits stood beside interns clutching coffee cups, all waiting to hear what the CEO had to say. No one knew what to expect. Then, David Cole appeared at the top of the staircase, overlooking the lobby, a man who looked different than he had just a day before. Gone was the cold arrogance in his eyes, replaced by something humbler, heavier. He didn't have his usual entourage or polished confidence. He just walked down the stairs, holding a single folder in his hand. "Good morning," he began, his voice steady, but softer than anyone had ever heard. "I called this meeting for one reason, because I owe someone in this building an apology and a thank you." Murmurs rippled through the crowd. David continued, "Yesterday morning, our systems nearly collapsed. A full server failure would have cost us hundreds of millions. But it didn't happen. It didn't happen because one person noticed what none of us did. One person cared enough to act, without being told, without expecting anything in return." He paused, looking over the faces in the room until his gaze found the man standing quietly near the back, mop handle resting against his cart. "Samuel Carter," David said, "would you please come forward?" The crowd turned. Some employees stepped aside as Samuel walked slowly through them, his expression calm, uncertain, his uniform faintly stained from his morning rounds. He stopped in front of the CEO, the two men facing each other like opposites in a mirror. David took a deep breath. "Mr. Carter, yesterday I realized something about this company, about myself. For years, I've built my career on the idea that power and control are what make a leader strong. But yesterday you reminded me that leadership isn't about control. It's about responsibility, about seeing what others don't and doing what's right even when no one's watching." He turned slightly to the employees. "This man prevented a catastrophe. He didn't do it for money or recognition. He did it because he cared. And I was the fool who treated him as if he didn't belong here." The lobby was silent. Then David extended his hand. "I owe you an apology, Mr. Carter. And on behalf of this entire company, I thank you." For a moment, Samuel just looked at the hand, the same one that had once waved him off like he was invisible. Then he smiled faintly and shook it. "You don't owe me anything, sir. Just treat people right. That's enough." The applause started slowly, one person clapping, then another, then the entire lobby filling with sound. Some people even cheered. For the first time in Brighton Holdings history, the loudest moment of the week wasn't about money. It was about respect. David waited for the noise to quiet, then opened the folder he was holding. "There's one more thing," he said. "Effective immediately, Mr. Carter's being offered a position as building operations consultant, with full benefits, senior pay, and a staff to train under him. Because a man who can save this company deserves more than a mop. He deserves a platform." Gasps and murmurs rippled again. Samuel blinked, stunned. "Sir, that's..." That's not necessary. David smiled gently. Maybe not for you, but it's necessary for us. We need people like you teaching the rest of us how to see what matters. Samuel hesitated, his voice soft. I appreciate it. But before I say yes, I need to tell you something. David nodded. Go ahead. Samuel looked around the room, then back at him. I wasn't always a janitor. 20 years ago, I was an electrical engineer at a manufacturing firm in Detroit. Built systems like the one in your server room. After my wife passed, I left everything behind. The work stopped meaning something when I didn't have anyone to share it with. So I took small jobs, fixing, cleaning, helping. I figured if I could keep a place running, I was still doing something useful. The room was utterly silent now. Even the clicking of keyboards and shuffling of papers had stopped. I've seen companies rise and fall, Samuel continued quietly. Not because of bad business, but because they forgot that people keep the lights on. Not money, not titles, just people. David's eyes lowered, shame and respect mingling in his voice. Then maybe it's time this company remembered that. Samuel smiled faintly. Then we understand each other. The applause rose again, but this time David didn't speak. He just stood beside Samuel, clapping with everyone else. Later that day, as the office returned to normal, a new energy filled the building. Lighter, warmer. David passed through the halls, greeting employees by name, something he hadn't done in years. And in the lobby, Samuel Carter began training a small group of maintenance staff, explaining how to handle power systems, safety checks, and the importance of paying attention. David watched from a distance. For the first time, he didn't see the janitor. He saw a man with more integrity than any boardroom could ever hold. That night, when David left the office, he passed the marble floor Samuel had cleaned the day before. The surface gleamed, flawless, reflecting the city lights. He caught his own reflection in it and thought, maybe it's time I started cleaning up the parts of myself that no one sees. And somewhere in that reflection, beneath the perfection of glass and marble, a bit of humility had finally taken root. A few weeks passed, and life inside Brighton Holdings settled into a new rhythm. For the first time in years, the building didn't feel like a place of fear and competition. It felt human. People spoke to each other in the elevators, smiled at the janitors, and even David Cole seemed transformed. The staff had started calling it the Carter effect. Samuel Carter had become more than just the company's quiet hero. He was now the man everyone went to when something broke, both literally and metaphorically. His calm presence grounded the chaos. When tensions rose during meetings, someone would joke, maybe we should ask Mr. Carter what to do, and suddenly the room would relax. But beneath the new warmth, something darker was brewing. One rainy Thursday, David sat in his office, reviewing the final stages of the merger deal. The numbers looked flawless, the projections even better, but something felt off. He couldn't quite name it, an itch at the back of his mind. He buzzed his assistant. Bring me the financials from the partner firm again. When she did, he skimmed the documents, then frowned. The energy company they were merging with, Eastwell Industries, had adjusted their environmental liability statements overnight. What was once a minor clause had been rewritten to shift legal responsibility entirely onto Brighton Holdings. If the deal went through, David's company would be liable for hundreds of millions in potential cleanup costs. He leaned back, cold realization creeping through him. It wasn't a merger, it was a trap. His phone buzzed. His chief financial officer. David, we need your signature in the next 10 minutes to close the deal. The board's waiting. He hung up without answering. The documents were legal labyrinths, but he could see the trick clearly now. The numbers were doctored, but clean enough to fool even the best accountants. He muttered under his breath, how did no one catch this? Then, as if on instinct, he grabbed the phone and called downstairs. Get Samuel Carter up here. Now! Moments later, Samuel appeared in the doorway, rain still clinging to his jacket. You needed me, sir? David waved him inside. I know this sounds strange, but I need another set of eyes. There's something in this contract, something that doesn't add up. Samuel walked over to the desk, glancing at the papers. What am I looking at? Environmental liability transfer clauses, David said. They changed the wording last night. It's subtle, but if I sign this, they own our assets, and we own their mess. Samuel studied the documents for a moment, then nodded toward the section highlighted in yellow. Here, see this phrase. Retroactive compliance responsibility? That means they're shifting every past violation to you. I saw something like this 20 years ago when my old company got swallowed by a mining corporation. We thought it was a deal too good to be true. Turned out it was. David blinked. You caught that in 30 seconds. Samuel smiled faintly. Experience, sir. Sometimes the dirtiest messes aren't on the floor. For a long moment, David just stared at him. This man who used to mop his hallways, now saving him again. He picked up the phone and called the boardroom. Delay the signing, now. There was silence on the other end, then the CFO's tense voice. David, we can't. Yes, we can, he interrupted sharply. And we will. The contract's fraudulent. Within an hour, Brighton's legal team was digging into the details. Samuel stood quietly by the window as David fielded angry calls and tense questions. By evening, it was confirmed. Eastwell Industries had falsified documents to dump millions in liabilities onto Brighton. The merger would have bankrupted them within the year. When the last call ended, David sat back, exhausted but relieved. He turned to Samuel, who was still standing quietly, watching the rain streak down the glass. You just saved this company again, David said quietly. You do it without trying. Samuel smiled. You'd be surprised how much you see when you stop looking down on people. David laughed softly, not bitterly this time, but with humility. You've taught me more in a month than every leadership seminar I've ever attended. Then I've done my job, Samuel said, picking up his cap. David frowned slightly. Where are you going? Home, Samuel said simply. But before I do, there's something you should know. He turned, his eyes kind but firm. You don't need to prove to anyone that you're in control. The best leaders don't command respect. They earn it. The moment you remember that, this company will never fall again. David stood, extending his hand. Then I hope you'll stay long enough to make sure I don't forget it. Samuel hesitated, then took the hand. All right, Mr. Cole, but only if you stop calling me the janitor. David grinned. Deal. 2 weeks later, Brighton Holdings issued a public statement cutting ties with Eastwell and launching a new community initiative in its place. One focused on ethics, education, and opportunity for underprivileged youth. At the launch ceremony, David stood on stage beside Samuel. Cameras flashed, journalists whispered, but David didn't care. When it was his turn to speak, he said, This company used to believe that success was measured by profits. But today, I stand beside a man who taught me that success is measured by the good we leave behind. Mr. Samuel Carter didn't just save our business. He saved our values. The audience erupted in applause, and Samuel, modest as always, just smiled and nodded. But as David glanced at him, he could see something deeper in his eyes. Quiet pride, hard-earned wisdom, and a peace no title could ever buy. Later that night, as they walked out of the building together, the city lights reflecting on the wet pavement, David said softly, Funny, isn't it? The man I once looked down on turned out to be the one I look up to. Samuel chuckled. Life's got a way of cleaning things up, doesn't it? And for the first time, David understood the lesson completely.